What does the war on drugs look like from the front lines? Well, let's ask Jack Cole. He's the Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, also known as LEAP. Jack, tell me what you saw when you were a cop, and how did it change your mind about the way we wage war on drugs?
Well, I saw this thing grow from the beginning of the war, which was 1970. That's when I started working undercover in narcotics, and I spent 14 years there, so I really saw this grow from that point. And at the beginning, we really didn't have much of a problem with drugs in this country. As a matter of fact, if you go back and look at the statistics, you'll find that the likelihood of anybody dying as a result of the drug culture in 1970 was less than the likelihood of them dying from falling down the steps in their own house. It was less than the likelihood of them dying from choking to death in their own food at dinner. But we started a war on drugs. And once we started that war, arrests became literally a numbers game with the police. You've got to remember, police get paid by the number of arrests they make. I mean, not the individual police officer, but the department does. Every year, municipal, state, and county police get grants from the federal government, and those grants are based on how many drug arrests they made the year before. So we get paid for arresting people for drug violations. We don't get paid for arresting people for murder or rape or robbery. So you can imagine which one we're going to concentrate on.
Okay, and tell me, when you're surveying the scene in 1970, when you look back, who do you think benefited from the war on drugs?
Well, certainly the drug dealers benefit terrifically from the war on drugs. They would be the last people in the world who would want to see these drugs legalized and regulated by the government. It's just like when Al Capone was dealing in alcohol back in the 1920s, and he loved the idea that it was illegal because we literally created organized crime out of it. He made millions and millions of dollars. Now these drug cartels are making billions of dollars. And it's a very strange situation to me when both the drug dealers and the U.S. administration, presidential administration, are both on the side of keeping drugs illegal.
Well, Jack, you also point to the unintended consequences of the drug war and the fact that we actually see more impurities as a consequence of drugs like heroin, for example, being illegal, which end up harming the folks who are taking these drugs.
That's right. And let me tell you, when I started buying heroin on the streets of New Jersey, it was the same across the whole United States.
As a police officer.
As a police officer?
Yes,
like
certainly, as an undercover police officer.
Oh, yes, of course.
At that time, the heroin was coming in, or the powder that we called heroin, was coming in at only 1.5% of that was actually heroin. Today, according to the DEA, the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, 60% of that powder is coming in on average heroin. So you can imagine how many more overdoses there are today than there were then. Something like 9 times as many, according to the Center for Disease Control.
And nowadays,
everything we've done has made this worse.
Yeah, nowadays a lot of people are using heroin in the suburbs because they've gotten addicted to pain pills for maybe a legitimate medical concern, and then either the doctor won't prescribe them anymore or they just get too expensive and they turn to heroin.
I think that there are probably a few people like that, certainly.
Jack, I'm sorry, Jack, we have a brief time amount left. We saw in the Ferguson case, in the wake of that about 80% of all drug warrants are executed using SWAT teams, or 80% of SWAT team activities are executing drug warrants, I should say. What percentage of a local police force's activity do you think is tied up in some way to the drug war, if you could quantify that?
Well, I wouldn't quantify necessarily their activities, but I can tell you that the studies show that effectively all the overtime for all the police in the United States is paid for by the drug war. Wow. So these departments have a great stake into continuing this war. They get a lot of money for what they're doing out there. Plus, this isn't even to mention the forfeiture laws. You know, we have laws that say if you're accused of having used drugs or sold drugs or in any way had anything to do with drug laws, the police can take your property away. They can take your car, your house, whatever you own. And that all goes on the market and it's auctioned off, and then that money is split between the police department that made the seizure and the district attorney's office that prosecutes the case.
All right, well, law enforcement
the forfeiture laws
against...
are literally a license to steal in this country.